What is going on, everyone? So in this week's video, we're going to take an in-depth look at the Chamonix Alpinist X 8x10 camera. Now, as a matter of full disclosure, I paid full price for this camera. I've owned it for a little over a year. I've taken it on 4 separate photography trips, and I have zero affiliation with Chamonix. They don't know I'm making this video. It's just a review I'm doing because it's a pretty awesome camera. So that all being said, let's take a look at the Chamonix Alpinist X 8x10. So let's start by taking a look at the camera in its folded position. It's a very clean package here and also quite strong thanks to this carbon fiber piece right here, which nestles in with the base of the front standard, and so that it doesn't have any give when you squeeze it. Some cameras are a little bit precarious when they're folded because you can squeeze them in a little bit too far. But it's very solid, does very well in the case that it comes with, which is right here. The case is a little bit big for the camera. I think it was designed probably for some of the other 8x10s I have, but it does just fine. If you look at the back of the camera, you see that there is a built-in ground glass protector that's made out of carbon fiber. So it's a very clever design there. I see the focusing knob here, knobs on the side. So a few things that hang out on the side, but overall it's a very condensed package. And then on the bottom of the camera, the threaded holes are quite far apart, which is nice, which makes it easier to add my favorite quick release plate for 8x10 cameras. This is the Kessler quick stand, and it has these nice wings on it, which gives nice side-to-side support with an Arca Swiss type clamp or rail down the middle there. So let's go ahead and mount this to the tripod here. And I should mention that this is one of 3 different Alpinist 8x10 cameras from Chamonix. The first one that came out with was horizontal only, meaning that that camera was smaller and lighter than this one. And then they came out with a vertical only, which was basically the same size and weight as a horizontal only. But for me, I really want the flexibility of shooting horizontal and vertical. So when they came out with the X, which has a rotating back, for me, that was the best of both worlds. Something that's lightweight, very well built, but a lot more flexible than a horizontal only camera. So with the camera attached here in the front, to open it up, we have these 2 knobs on the side. And so we're going to loosen both of those knobs. And when we do that, this will swing up. And it's going to stop exactly at 90 degrees. And that is thanks to a very clever mechanism. There are these little sliders right here. So you can see how it has a nice, very solid stopping point there. But if I were to take these little levers on either side, pull them back, it will go beyond 90 degrees. So this is for if you're using any rear movements, but it's easy enough to lock it in at the exactly 90-degree point for most of the shooting you're going to do. On the front of it, this is the bottom of the front standard. So it is going to swing out like this. And then this will line up. And we're going to thread this into one of 4 different threaded positions on the focusing bed here. I'm going to be putting my normal 300mm lens on. And I find that for that lens, the second position works best. The end for my 450 or my 600, and then my 240, and then my 150. And so it's pretty easy to figure out which lens goes where. There are marks on here in terms of getting everything squared away, which is very visible. And again, we have the marks right there and right there. On the front standard, these outer knobs are going to control this motion right here. And the inner knobs, you're going to control the up and down. It's very smooth with the motion. These rails here are all carbon fiber, so it's basically carbon fiber on carbon fiber. So it's very, very smooth, very precise, and very easy to work with. If we look at the front standard here, there's felt there on the inside, and the locking mechanism are these little knobs right here, which move in opposite directions to lock down. I have my lens on a Chamonix adapter board, and it has the same mechanisms here. So I do this awkwardly one-handed. So I have the lens actually on a Chamonix board that goes into the adapter board. These guys lock in place, that drops in place, and then these lock in place like that. It's a very simple mechanism. There's been a couple times when working with the camera, I found that one of them had loosened where I had bumped it accidentally. I think part of that is just muscle memory. As you saw earlier, trying to do this one-handed can be a little bit awkward. It's really a two-handed operation to work with. And the adapter board here does match the aesthetic of the camera. Same type of wood, same type of carbon fiber, which is quite nice. So with the front of the camera pretty well set there, one other thing as we turn to the side that I want to talk about is the bellows. Now these bellows are very soft and very pliable, which is nice. And there's this snap right here. And so it's not quite as necessary with this lens being my 300mm lens. But let's say that I was using my 240mm lens, which I would move the camera back to this position here. And at this position, it gets to be a little bit awkward. And you can see that the bellows want to sag a little bit. That's what this snap right here is for. This will snap under the front standard there. And by doing that, it holds the bellows nice and tall there. So that does work very well. It's a very clever design. If I was using my long lens, like my 450 or my 600, we have a little bit of a different situation with the bellows. So I'm going to tighten that down there. And then at the back of the camera, I'm going to loosen this so I can focus it out. I'm going to turn this around a little bit more so I get easier access to it. So if I really start focusing this out, you'll see that the bellows are going to have a tendency to drop a little bit. It's just a factor of the way that the materials are. And so in order to make sure that, especially if I'm shooting a vertical photo, that this bellow here, right in the middle, doesn't sag into the frame, what I often do is I'll take one of the lenses I have already in a wrap, or just the wrap by itself, and you simply place that underneath and you can prop it up just fine. So I don't see that as a flaw in the camera. I see it just what happens when you have bellows that can accommodate up to a 600mm lens, as well as all the way down to like my 150mm wide angle. And so it's very easy to work with that, and it's something that is fairly apparent when you're in the field and you're working with it. So I'm going to rack the focus back in, and you also see that the focusing is set on the back of the camera. And I have some thoughts on the focusing mechanism as well. So if we continue around the side of the camera, we have the knobs we already talked about right here, which is going to adjust the rear standard. But we also have these guys. So on either side, we have knobs right here on the base. And if I was working with a very long lens, you can actually extend the back of the camera out quite significantly, or you can also pull it in quite close. These knobs can slide forward, and this whole thing is going to slide forward quite a ways. So it's pretty adaptable. Also allows you to have some rear swing. And I found that the process of switching between my 450 lens or my 600 lens and my normal lenses, it doesn't take much time and effort. This thing can just slide back a little bit, and it's pretty easy to work with. Again, we have carbon fiber around here, and base of the camera is a sandwich between wood and carbon fiber. So it's going to give a lot of structure, yet also a lot of rigidity from the carbon fiber. Now moving towards the back of the camera, let's take a look at the ground glass protector. Pretty easy, simple design. This, I will oftentimes just throw it in the bag when I'm working with it, but there's been times when I'll use this to help shade the front element a little bit. So pretty clever design. I always love it when the manufacturer gives a very nice ability to protect the ground glass. So let's take a moment to talk about film holder compatibility. Now this camera is perfectly compatible with standard film holders like the Toyo holders, Fidelity, Ely, any of the traditional 8x10 film holders. But I will say that there is a significant advantage to working with the Chamonix holders. It all has to do with the design of the holders and how it interfaces with the camera. So if I were to hold these side by side, line them up at the base, you'll see that both of them have the standard ridge right here, which fits into the groove on the inside there to produce a nice light trap, but also allows it to have this nice click when you put it in place. But if you look at the top of the Chamonix holder, it's all flat right here, versus the Toyo one has this added lip here. And so this space is different from this space. I'm going to show you where that comes into play. So let's start by inserting the Chamonix film holder. There's a bail back design. I'm going to open it up just like that. Just lock the tripod in place here. And then we are going to insert the film holder like so. And as we get kind of close, at some point you're going to hear a little click as the ridge of the film holder drops into the slot in the back of the camera, right there. And then we can go ahead and close this, and that's all you have to do. So pretty straightforward. You can always double check that it's in there seated properly by looking at this edge here to make sure it's nice and flush with the end there. So very simple with the Chamonix holders. Now I'm going to grab the Toyo holder, and there's this one more step to be aware of. So we're going to start the same thing, insert the film holder like so. And as we get closer, it's going to have that ridge of the film holder drop into the slot right there. And then we can go ahead and close this. One other thing we have to be mindful of is this second ridge right here actually wraps around the outside edge of the camera. And sometimes you have to squeeze it a little bit here just to make sure that this ridge doesn't get hung up on the edge of the camera. It's not a big deal, it's just something to be aware of, and I think that's a byproduct of making this camera as small as possible. The other advantage of working with the Chamonix holders is that they are very lightweight. So the standard wooden Chamonix holders are notably lighter than Toyo, and they also have some extremely lightweight ones that they look basically the same, but somehow they're lighter weight. I don't know how they do it, and it's not quite half the weight of the standard ones, but it takes a significant chunk off the weight. So when backpacking, those are very advantageous as well. But it's just one thing to be aware of when working with the camera, but I really do love this bail back design. It's very simple, very easy to use. And when I first got this camera, one of the big questions was, how do I change between horizontal and vertical? Because it's a very clean design, you don't see anything. Until I finally realized that you push up, you take off the back like so. And if you look at the back of the camera, you'll see that there are these little metal screws that have these lips that stand out. And then on the back of the ground glass, and you're not going to be able to see this in the video, but there are some slots within the carbon fiber here and here, here and here. And what happens is it's partially magnets, partially gravity. So it basically goes in and then drops down and locks in place. So if I wanted to go to a vertical orientation, I'd simply put it on here like this. The magnets will grab, and then it'll drop and secure it. So it is very secure when it's on there. Now I did run into one situation where I was taking a photo where the camera was pointed basically straight up at a canopy of some maple leaves above me, which is a very awkward position regardless. And the dark cloth I was using at the time happened to release the sort of the gravity assist, and then I did have the back fall off. Thankfully it fell off into some very soft sand and nothing was damaged, but it did make me very aware that if you're in a situation where it can easily get bumped and it's already at an awkward angle, it might be a little bit more prone to that. So I highly doubt I will have situations like that in the future, but if I do, perhaps there's some way of just adding an extra little safety on here, or whether it's some sort of simple clamp that's not going to damage anything, or a big rubber band that goes around it, or something along those lines. When it comes to the ground glass itself, there's no Fresnel screen on this, though honestly, I don't miss it. I've used cameras with and without a Fresnel, and I don't find that it makes a big difference to me. I think some people swear by them. I don't know. I've always gotten by without them. My previous camera had one. It was nice, though I don't think it was necessarily a deal breaker for me. Now, one thing I do wish that this had was a stronger grid. The grid that's on this camera is very faintly etched into the ground glass, and it's really hard to see. You really have to look hard to see it. This is coming from my previous camera that had a white grid that was painted onto the ground glass. And when you look at it under the dark cloth, it goes black because it's silhouette. But I loved having that grid. I love being able to measure things. I love being able to see exactly where the center point was. And again, this one has that, but it's very, very faint. So one recommendation I'd have to Chamonix would be to really have a stronger grid, or perhaps have an option maybe that has a stronger grid plus a Fresnel where you kind of get both. But again, I don't find the lack of a Fresnel to be a negative thing. For focusing, so our focusing is set with this knob right here at the base, so it's very convenient when you are under the dark cloth. There is a lock, and it's gonna be hard to see, but there's this lever that locks in place right here, and when you do that, it does completely lock in place. Now, that lever is absolutely necessary because with the way that this is designed, so basically I can pull on the front, let me get a little area where I get a little better grip, and I can actually make this spin by pushing and pulling. And you can see how if you are aiming downward, you're taking a picture of something on the ground, the weight of the lens, the weight of the front standard is enough to move it. So this lock becomes absolutely essential. I do wish that the design was a little bit different, a bit more like what Intrepid did, whereas with the Intrepid, you cannot push and pull that on its own. It's just geared differently. It's worth mentioning that there is a screw on the side here. It has a hex, a head on it, and you can use a really tiny Allen wrench to tighten that, and that sets your base tension. And I did add a little bit more base tension just to help with that. But it's very well worth mentioning that you do absolutely need to use that lock there. Otherwise, the focus can drift based on gravity. So it's one of those things where you learn to work with, and it's not that big of a deal as you work with it. Another thing too that I noticed is that the bellows sometimes have a tendency when you fold the camera to get caught on this lever right here. And I think it's not anything that is going to cause any sort of problems. The one thing that I do before I fold the camera is I have this piece of foam here, and I kind of wedge it in here. And then when I close the camera, that helps keep the bellows nice and flat and away from that lock there. So very, very simple thing that does a very, very good job. And overall, I am extremely satisfied with this camera. It has earned a spot as my primary camera. It can handle my 600mm lens just fine. It can handle my 450, my 300, my 240, and my 150. So everything from my wide lens to my long lens. It does very well in the wind. The rear standard is very strong because of this support right here. And so you see any movement right now is mostly just because my tripod head is not tightened down, but it's very rigid there. The front standard is also very rigid. So this camera will do better in the wind than many cameras that are out there. And I also recently put out a video where I was talking about the dark cloth I use with this camera. And so I use a dark cloth that is made by a company called Wanderer. It's the ultralight dark cloth. And I have right here. And it folds down really small. Actually, I can keep it in the case with the camera. But this holds really nicely onto the back of the camera without putting any pressure on the corner of the bellows or anywhere like that. But overall, I'm extremely pleased with this camera. I originally purchased it as a sort of a very high-grade backpacking camera because it is incredibly lightweight, but it has earned a spot as my primary camera. So If you are in any way interested in this camera, I do highly recommend it. It is expensive, but it's worth it. So I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you around next time.